For 7 long years, I lived as a full-time housewife, trapped in a prison of my own making. Every single time I needed to ask my husband Jackson for living expenses, it felt like I was begging for scraps from a king's table. $1,500 a month. That's all he gave me, yet he acted like he was handing over his entire fortune. The way his jaw would clench, the heavy sigh that escaped his lips, the look of pure irritation that crossed his face. It made me feel smaller each time. But that day, that fateful day when everything changed, I finally reached my breaking point. I stopped doing the endless housework that never seemed to be appreciated. I refused to care for his wheelchair-bound Mother Barbara, who treated me like her personal servant. And in the most dramatic move of all, I dropped our 6-year-old daughter Grace right at Jackson's office doorstep, leaving him to figure out what real responsibility looked like. Then I did something I hadn't done in 7 years. I found a job and started living my life. When their perfectly organized world crumbled into chaos without me holding it together, Jackson came crawling back on his hands and knees, begging for my forgiveness. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it all started. I remember staring at the empty balance in my bank account that morning, the harsh reality of my situation hitting me like a slap across the face. My stomach churned as I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed out what felt like the most humiliating message of my life. "Jackson, are you busy? It's time to transfer this month's living expenses." I hit send and waited, and waited. The message disappeared into the digital void without even a read receipt to acknowledge its existence. Meanwhile, my daughter Grace tugged persistently at my hand, her bright eyes filled with innocent hope. "Mommy, can we get cake? Please?" The pretty one from the bakery with the pink frosting. She kept pulling me toward the door, her tiny feet dancing with excitement. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Here was my beautiful little girl, asking for something as simple as a slice of cake, and I couldn't even afford that basic pleasure for her. "Sweetie, Mommy doesn't have money right now," I said, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "Let's wait until Daddy gives me the money, and then I'll take you to get the biggest, most beautiful cake in the whole bakery. Okay?" Grace, always the understanding child, nodded solemnly and stopped insisting. But her reaction broke something inside me. We weren't a poor family. Far from it. Jackson made excellent money at his corporate job. So how had it come to this? Why did my precious daughter have to tiptoe around her own desires just because her mother had to beg for every penny? I swallowed my pride and sent another message, this time mentioning Grace specifically. "Honey, are you busy? If you're not, could you transfer this month's expenses when you have a moment? Grace really wants some cake, but I don't have the money." This time, mentioning our daughter seemed to penetrate his wall of indifference. My phone buzzed with a voice message, but his tone made my blood run cold. His voice dripped with irritation and barely concealed contempt. "Got it. Stop nagging me like some kind of debt collector. I'm busy working here. I'll send it later when I have time." "Okay," I whispered to myself, feeling relieved that at least he'd acknowledged my request. I tucked my phone away and headed to the kitchen to start preparing dinner, trying to push down the humiliation that burned in my chest. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Halfway through chopping vegetables for our evening meal, Grace suddenly doubled over, clutching her stomach. Before I could react, she was vomiting violently, followed by severe diarrhea that left her weak and crying. Terror shot through my veins, like ice water. I scooped her up in my arms and rushed to the hospital, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. But when we arrived at the emergency room, Jackson still hadn't sent the money. I stood at the pharmacy counter, watching other parents pay for their children's medications, while I couldn't even afford the basic antibiotics Grace needed. With no other choice, I called Jackson. The moment he answered, his voice exploded through the phone like a verbal assault. "Didn't I tell you I'm busy? What part of that don't you understand? You're like a broken record, constantly nagging me about money. It's so annoying I can barely concentrate on my work. Jackson, please. Grace is sick and I said I'll send the money when I have time. Stop bothering me. The line went dead. I stood there in that sterile hospital hallway, my phone still pressed against my ear, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. Tears streamed down my face as the full weight of my situation crashed over me. How had my life spiraled into this nightmare? When had I become so powerless, so dependent, so invisible? My mind drifted back to the beginning, to when Jackson and I first met through mutual friends at a dinner party. It truly had been love, at first sight, or at least I thought it was. Jackson was charming, ambitious, and full of promises about our future together. His career was just taking off in the finance world, and he painted beautiful pictures of the life we'd build together. We married quickly, caught up in the whirlwind of new love and shared dreams. That's when I moved in with his mother, Barbara, who had been wheelchair-bound for years following a car accident. Barbara's condition had made her temperament challenging, to put it mildly. She'd gone through 17 different housekeepers in 2 years. Most couldn't last more than a few weeks under her constant criticism and demands. Jackson, focused entirely on climbing the corporate ladder, had looked at me with those persuasive eyes and said, "Madison, sweetheart, would you consider staying home? I know it's a big ask, but if you could manage the household and take care of Mom, it would mean everything to me. I promise. If you do this, I'll hand over my entire salary to you. You'll be the true head of this household." Looking back now, I can see how naive I was. But at the time, his proposal seemed romantic, even empowering. I'd been working as a marketing coordinator, making decent money and building my own career. But Jackson made it sound like I'd be gaining control, not losing it. So I quit my job and threw myself into the role of full-time housewife and caregiver. In the beginning, Jackson kept his promise. Every month, like clockwork, he'd hand me his entire paycheck. I felt important, needed, valued. I managed our finances, paid the bills, and even had money left over for little luxuries. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. First, it was, "I need some cash for client dinners, you understand, business expenses." Then it became, "I should probably keep some money for work clothes and transportation." Eventually, he started making bigger claims. "The company's going through a restructuring, and I need to maintain relationships with my superiors. You know how expensive those golf outings can be." One day, Jackson simply took the salary card back. "It's easier this way," he explained. "I'll just transfer you what you need for household expenses." What I needed, according to him, kept shrinking. It started at $4,000 or $5,000 a month, which felt reasonable. Then it dropped to $3,000. Before I knew it, I was living on $1,500 a month, barely enough to cover groceries, utilities, and Grace's basic needs. And now, even that pittance came with delays, attitude, and constant reminders of how generous he was being. Standing in that hospital, holding my sick daughter while being unable to afford her medicine, I finally understood the truth. I hadn't gained power in our household. I'd become a prisoner. I swallowed what remained of my pride and borrowed $300 from my friend Sarah to cover Grace's emergency treatment. The shame burned in my throat like acid, but my daughter's health came first. When we finally got home that evening, Jackson and Barbara were waiting like 2 vultures circling their prey. Neither of them asked about Grace's condition, not once. Instead, they immediately launched into their usual chorus of complaints and criticisms. Jackson wasn't back from work yet, but Barbara had been napping all afternoon and was now wide awake and furious. The moment she heard my key in the door, her voice echoed through the house like nails on a chalkboard. "You worthless woman. Where have you been gallivanting around all day? Get in here and take care of me immediately." I helped Grace to her room, made sure she was comfortable, and then went to deal with Barbara. I found her in bed, glaring at me with the kind of hatred usually reserved for war criminals. "It's nearly dinner time and you haven't prepared anything," she snapped. "Jackson will be home soon, and you're planning to starve him? All you do is sit around this house doing nothing. Honestly, I don't know why my son married such a lazy, useless woman." Her words barely registered anymore. After 7 years of this treatment, I'd developed a thick skin out of sheer necessity. When I first married Jackson, Barbara's cruelty used to send me running to him in tears, begging for protection and support. But Jackson never truly stood up for me. Instead, he'd offer gentle words and small gifts to calm me down. Never once confronting his mother directly. "She's in constant pain because of her condition," he'd explain patiently. "That's why she's so irritable. Please try to be patient with her for my sake." So I endured. Year after year, insult after insult, I endured. Jackson came home around 8 that evening, and I worked up the courage to ask him again about the money during dinner. "Honey, can you please transfer this month's living expenses now? I'm completely out of money, and I need to buy groceries tomorrow." Instead of simply transferring the money, Jackson launched into one of his condescending lectures. "You women have it so easy. You don't even have to work. You just sit at home waiting for the men to bring in the money. Then, the second the month starts, you're nagging nonstop about expenses. Do you have any idea how hard I work to earn that money?" He said it as if I'd chosen this arrangement, as if I'd always been this dependent and helpless. He conveniently forgot that I'd had my own career and financial independence before he begged me to give it all up. Barbara, never one to miss an opportunity to pile on, chimed in with her venom. "Exactly. My son works himself to the bone every single day, and you're constantly pestering him for money. You think he's made of gold? You should learn to be more grateful and spend less." I tried to reason with them, keeping my voice calm and measured. "I've been budgeting as carefully as possible. $1,500 a month barely covers groceries, utilities, and Grace's school supplies and snacks. I'm not asking for luxuries here." Jackson slammed his fork down on his plate, the sound reverberating through the dining room like a gunshot. "What do you mean 1,500 isn't enough? How much more do you want, you greedy woman? Some people live on much less than that." Every word felt like a physical blow. Each accusation cut deeper than the last. I thought I could endure it, just like I always had. I thought I could swallow my pride one more time and pretend everything was fine. But then Barbara crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. While picking at her food with obvious disdain, she muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "And that bratty little daughter of yours, why are you wasting money buying her cake anyway? What's the point of spoiling her? You'd be better off saving that money to help my son with his expenses." That was it. That was the moment. 7 years of suppressed rage erupted like a volcano. "Enough!" I screamed, jumping to my feet and slamming my plate down so hard it cracked against the table. The sound seemed to echo through the entire house. I turned to Jackson, my voice rising to a level I didn't even know I possessed. "You act like $1,500 is a fortune, like I'm asking you for millions. You tell me not to nag you about money, but you never send it unless I do. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to have to borrow money from friends just to take Grace to the hospital today? Do you have any clue what that did to me as a mother?" I pointed my finger directly at his shocked face. "Jackson, I had a career once. I was independent and successful. You were the one who begged me to quit my job to stay home and care for your mother in our house. Do you think I wanted this life? Do you think I enjoy having to grovel for every penny just to feed our daughter?" Then I turned to Barbara, 7 years of bottled-up fury finally finding its voice. "And you're always complaining about me spending your son's money. Have you ever stopped to think about why I'm even here? If it weren't for you and your constant need for care, do you think I would have given up my career to become your personal nursemaid?" My voice grew louder, more confident. Do you have any idea how much it costs to hire a professional caregiver? These days, $5,000 a month minimum. And that's for someone with a pleasant personality. For someone with your attitude, it would cost even more. Here I am, doing all of that for a measly $1,500, and you have the audacity to call me greedy? You should be thanking me every single day. The relief I felt letting it all out was indescribable. It was like removing a 100-pound weight from my shoulders. Jackson and Barbara, on the other hand, looked like they'd been struck by lightning. Madison, have you completely lost your mind? Jackson sputtered, his face cycling through various shades of red and purple. What's gotten into you? I met his shocked stare with steady determination. No, Jackson. I've never been more clear-headed in my life. From this moment forward, I'm done. I'm done begging you for money. I'm done managing this house like your personal servant. I'm done taking care of your mother. Grace is your daughter too, and we'll be sharing parenting duties equally from now on. Let's see how you manage when I'm not here to hold everything together. Ignoring their protests and Barbara's shrieking complaints, I took Grace by the hand and headed to our room. I expected Grace to be frightened by my outburst, but when I looked down at her, her eyes were sparkling with something that looked suspiciously like admiration. "Mommy," she said quietly, "you were amazing today." I stopped in my tracks, stunned. But sweetheart, if Mommy starts working again, I might not have as much time to take care of you. Grace's response nearly brought me to my knees. That's okay, Mommy. I'm already 6 years old. My teachers take care of me at school, and on weekends, I can take care of myself. I just want you to be happy. I hugged her so tightly, tears streaming down my face. This beautiful, wise little girl was the only good thing to come out of my marriage to Jackson. In that moment, I made a promise to myself and to her. I would never look back. I would never again be the submissive, powerless woman who begged for scraps. That night marked the beginning of my revolution. I thought Jackson and Barbara might last 3 days without me taking care of everything. It turned out I'd vastly overestimated their capabilities. They didn't even make it through the first night. At 10 o'clock, just as I'd gotten Grace settled and was finally relaxing for the first time in months, Jackson came knocking on my door. He looked uncomfortable and defeated, holding a check in his hand like a white flag of surrender. "Here's this month's money," he said awkwardly. "Also, Mom had an accident. Can you please go clean it up?" It seemed that having a wheelchair-bound mother who relied on adult diapers for all her bodily functions made it impossible for Jackson to manage even one night without my help. All those times I'd silently handled these situations without complaint. He must have thought it was effortless. He was about to learn just how wrong he'd been. I pushed the check back into his hands without even looking at the amount. "Oh, I wouldn't dare take your money. After all, you and your mother made it very clear that I'm just a useless freeloader. From now on, I'll get a job and earn my own income. As for this house, your mother, and everything else, you figure it out." "I'm done." Jackson's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Come on, Madison, don't be so dramatic. I'll add another $1,500 to this month's budget, $3,000 total. Just stop this tantrum and go take care of Mom." He tried to hand me a new check for $3,000. I handed it right back, untouched. Jackson's face turned red with frustration. "Enough already. If you keep this up, don't expect me to give you another cent." I'd already made my decision. Who needed his money anymore? I physically pushed him toward the door. "Goodbye, Jackson." Fuming and muttering curses under his breath, Jackson stormed out of the room. But he had no choice. He had to go clean up after Barbara himself. And this was just the beginning of what was coming for both of them. When I woke up the next morning, Jackson had already left for work, probably hoping to escape before dealing with any more household crises. The moment I opened my bedroom door, Barbara's demanding voice filled the house like an air raid siren. "You lazy woman, sleeping until this ungodly hour. Are you trying to starve me to death? Get in here and make my breakfast immediately." I laughed coldly, the sound surprising even me. "Barbara, do you still think I'm the same daughter-in-law you can order around like a servant? I made it crystal clear to Jackson yesterday. I'm done. I won't take another penny from him, and I'm not taking care of you anymore. Whoever's mother you are, that's who needs to handle your care." Barbara's confident demeanor faltered immediately. She knew her son better than anyone, after all, and she understood exactly what kind of man she'd raised. Her expression shifted quickly, her tone softening as she forced an awkward, desperate smile. "Now, Madison, don't be impulsive. Married couples shouldn't be so petty about dividing responsibilities. Jackson works hard to earn the money, and it's only natural that you manage the house and care for the elderly. But of course, it's his fault for being forgetful about the living expenses. When he gets home tonight, I'll make sure to give him a proper scolding." Her sudden change of attitude wasn't satisfying. It was pathetic. For 7 years, I'd taken care of Barbara without receiving a single word of thanks or appreciation. Now that I'd threatened to stop, she was all smiles and false flattery. Some people truly have no shame. I ignored her completely and went to the kitchen to make breakfast, but only enough for Grace and myself. Barbara sat in the living room, watching us eat while her stomach growled audibly. Her face turned various shades of green and purple with rage. "You cruel, heartless woman," she shrieked. "Are you trying to starve me to death?" I responded calmly, not even looking up from my plate. "Don't blame me for this. I told Jackson last night that I was done taking care of you. He knew exactly what that meant, and he still left you alone here this morning. If anyone's trying to starve you, it's your precious son, not me." After breakfast, I got Grace ready and we left the house together. If Jackson wanted to keep claiming that I did nothing all day while he slaved away to earn money, he was about to get a reality check. Let him handle everything without me for a while and see how long he could last. My first stop was Jackson's office building. I walked straight through the lobby, took the elevator to his floor, and marched directly to his desk. The moment he saw me, his face darkened like storm clouds gathering before a hurricane. He didn't wait for an explanation and launched into an angry tirade, though he kept his voice low enough that his colleagues couldn't hear every word. "Mom? Just called and said you only made breakfast for yourself and Grace," completely ignoring her. "Madison, what's your problem? Have you completely lost your mind?" I met his glare with calm determination. "I believe I made myself perfectly clear last night. I'm not taking another dime from you, and I'm done taking care of your mother. Are you having trouble understanding plain English?" Jackson, clearly conscious of his colleagues watching from nearby desks, lowered his voice further but couldn't hide his irritation. "Then why are you here? Can't you see I'm busy working?" I smiled sweetly. "Oh, so only you get to be busy? Let me tell you something, Jackson. I'm busy too. I'm busy looking for a job. Since we're apparently moving toward an equal partnership marriage, it's only fair that we share parenting duties equally. I don't owe you free childcare anymore. I took care of Grace yesterday. Today, she's all yours." As if on cue, Grace let go of my hand and ran over to Jackson with a bright smile. "Daddy, it's your turn to take care of me today. Mommy needs a break to go job hunting." Jackson's face flushed bright red with a mixture of panic and embarrassment. "Madison, are you insane? What do you expect me to do, bring a child to work? How does that look to my boss and colleagues?" I shrugged off his attempt to grab my arm and headed for the elevator. "That's your problem to figure out, Jackson. Good luck." As the elevator doors closed, I could see Jackson standing there in shock, holding Grace's hand while his coworkers whispered and stared. It felt absolutely magnificent. After leaving Jackson's office, I went straight to several domestic staffing agencies to look for work. My qualifications weren't extraordinary, and 7 years as a full-time housewife had left me somewhat out of touch with the modern professional world. At my age, It was unlikely that a corporate position would even consider my application. But housekeeping and caregiving? Those were skills I'd mastered through years of experience. To my surprise, I aced both interviews I went to that day. The agencies were genuinely impressed with my skills, experience, and professional demeanor. They assured me they'd contact me for trial assignments as soon as suitable families needed help. Walking out of those interviews, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope for my future. If I was going to do housework and caregiving anyway, I might as well do it for people who would value my efforts and pay me fairly. At least I'd earn my paycheck without having to endure the daily humiliation of being called lazy, useless, or greedy. Just as I was basking in this newfound optimism, my phone rang. It was Grace, and she was crying. Heart-wrenching sobs that made my maternal instincts scream. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked gently. "Don't cry. Take your time and tell Mommy what happened." Through her tears and sniffles, Grace's shaky voice broke my heart. "Mommy, Daddy got yelled at by his boss because he brought me to work. Then Daddy threw me outside the office building. There's no one here with me. I don't know where to go. I'm so scared, Mommy." "What?" That absolute bastard Jackson had abandoned our 6-year-old daughter on the street just because he couldn't handle the consequences of his own actions. Panic shot through my veins like electricity. I rushed to find Grace immediately, my heart pounding with terror and rage. When I finally located her, sitting alone on a bench outside Jackson's office building, looking small and frightened, relief flooded through me. But alongside that relief came a burning desire for revenge. I could have simply taken Grace home and let this slide, but that would have taught Jackson nothing. If I gave in now, he'd just use this tactic to manipulate me in the future whenever things got difficult. An idea sparked in my mind, a way to teach Jackson a lesson he would never, ever forget. I calmed myself down and dialed a number I'd never thought I'd need to call. "Hello, police. I'd like to report a case of child abandonment. A father has left his 6-year-old daughter alone on the street. Could you please come immediately?" The mention of child abandonment prompted a swift response from law enforcement. The officers arrived at the scene within 10 minutes, their faces serious and professional. A kind female officer comforted Grace, gently asking her questions and calming her down. Using the information Grace provided, they quickly identified Jackson as her father and his workplace location. When the police showed up at Jackson's office, asking for him by name, he was completely caught off guard. I watched through the lobby windows as Jackson's face turned pale as snow, stammering and stumbling over his words. This is all a misunderstanding, officers. How could I abandon my own daughter? She was just being difficult, so I left her outside for a few minutes to think about her behavior. It wasn't abandonment. The female officer's tone was stern and unwavering. "Sir, regardless of the reason, you cannot leave a child that young outside unattended. What if something dangerous had happened to her? What if she'd been hurt or kidnapped?" This was my moment. I burst through the lobby doors, putting on the performance of my lifetime. "Jackson, you monster! How could you abandon Grace like that? What kind of father throws his own daughter out on the street?" I let my voice rise to a volume that carried throughout the lobby. "I've given you everything. I bore your child, raised her with love, sacrificed my career to care for your paralyzed mother, and you can't even give me $1,500 a month for basic living expenses. Fine, you won't support us financially? I went out to find a job myself. But the moment I try to become independent, you throw our daughter away like garbage." My voice cracked with genuine emotion. "She's your own flesh and blood, Jackson. Are you even human?" Jackson's colleagues, who had already been curious about the police presence, now had front-row seats to the most dramatic confrontation of their careers. My tearful accusations and the undeniable evidence of Jackson's behavior struck a chord with everyone watching. I could see the judgment in their eyes. Sympathy for me, and absolute disgust for Jackson. Even his male coworkers looked embarrassed to be associated with someone who would abandon his own child. But I wasn't finished. Right there in front of everyone, I pulled out my phone and showed screenshots of our recent text message conversations, evidence of how I'd begged him for basic living expenses while he responded with impatience, disdain, and irritation. "Everyone, please judge for yourselves," I said, my voice carrying throughout the lobby. Before I married this man, I had a successful career and was completely financially independent. But he begged me to quit my job so I could take care of his paralyzed mother at home. And this is how he treats me now, like I'm some kind of burden or freeloader. The crowd's sympathy quickly transformed into outright disgust for Jackson. His professional reputation was crumbling before his eyes, and there wasn't a single thing he could do to stop it. Sensing that he was trapped, Jackson stepped forward and tried to grab my arm, probably hoping to drag me somewhere private where we could discuss this situation away from prying eyes. I immediately shrank back dramatically, hiding behind the police officer like a frightened victim. "Officer, please don't let him hit me. I'll be quiet, I promise. Please don't let him hurt me." The female officer immediately stepped between us, her hand moving to her radio. "Sir, not only did you abandon your child, but now you're attempting to assault your wife in front of witnesses. You'll need to come back to the station with us to give a full statement about both incidents." Jackson's humiliation was complete and total. Both of us were escorted to the police station, but his professional and personal reputation had been utterly destroyed in front of his entire workplace. At the police station, Jackson managed to avoid serious charges only after repeatedly promising the officers that he would never abandon Grace again and agreeing to attend mandatory parenting classes. The whole ordeal took several hours, during which Jackson had to endure lecture after lecture about proper parenting and child safety. On the drive home, Jackson kept his temper carefully controlled. But the moment we stepped inside our house, he exploded like a pressure cooker that had been building steam all day. "Madison, are you completely out of your mind? You barged into my workplace and caused the most humiliating scene of my entire life. My colleagues will never look at me the same way again. If this costs me my job, how exactly are you planning for us to survive?" I met his fury with calm, unshakable defiance. "You don't need to worry about that, Jackson. I'll have a job soon enough to support myself and Grace." His laugh was full of contempt and disbelief. "Oh, please, with your education level and how long you've been out of the workforce, who would hire you? You're living in a fantasy world." I smiled confidently. "I've spent 7 years running this household and taking care of you, Grace, and your mother. My experience managing a home and providing caregiving services makes me more than qualified for several positions. Multiple domestic staffing agencies have already expressed interest in hiring me." Jackson scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're talking about being a maid? That's your grand plan for independence? Do you even realize how humiliating that is for our family?" I couldn't help but laugh at his incredible hypocrisy. What's humiliating about earning an honest living doing work that I'm excellent at? At a TCE, at least when I work for other families, they'll respect me, appreciate my efforts, and pay me fairly for my time. I leaned forward, my voice growing stronger. "As a professional caregiver, I'll make $7,000 a month, Jackson. Compare that to the $1,500 you begrudgingly give me while treating me like dirt every single day. I'd say it's a massive improvement for me." Before we could continue our argument, Barbara's voice cut through the house like a rusty knife. "Jackson, stop fighting with her and make me some food. I haven't eaten anything all day." Jackson waved his hand dismissively, clearly exhausted from the day's events. "Fine, I'm done arguing about this. Just go make dinner already. Mom and Grace are hungry." I was hungry too, so I headed to the kitchen without another word. But when dinner was ready, I set the table with only 2 plates, one for Grace and one for myself. As Jackson automatically reached for what he assumed was his portion, I calmly moved the food away from him. "This meal is for Grace and me. If you and your mother want to eat, you're welcome to make your own food. Jackson's face twisted with a mixture of shock and rage. Are you seriously doing this right now, Madison? Do you even want to stay married to me? Don't forget that you're living in a house that I bought with my money. If you don't want to contribute to this family anymore, we can get divorced and see how well you survive on your own. I let out a cold, bitter laugh. Divorce threats? How predictable and pathetic. Yes, Jackson, you bought this house, but I've been contributing to this family for 7 years with my time, my labor, my sacrifices, and my unpaid caregiving services. I stood up, my voice growing more confident. You want to talk about money? Let's talk about money. Do you know how much a full-time caregiver costs these days? $7,000 a month minimum. And if they have to care for someone with a difficult personality like your mother, it costs even more. I pointed directly at him. You've been paying me less than $1,500 a month for all these years, if you even bothered to send it on time. So let's settle our accounts properly. Deduct reasonable rent for my portion of this house, then pay me the professional rate for all the years I've spent taking care of Barbara. Let's see who ends up owing whom money. Jackson's face turned bright red as he struggled to find a response, but he had none. He was completely outmatched in this argument, and we both knew it. With no other options, Jackson trudged to the kitchen and made some basic pasta for himself and Barbara. When Barbara took her first bite, she immediately spat it out in disgust. This is absolutely revolting, way too salty and completely flavorless at the same time. She turned her eyes longingly toward the perfectly seasoned lemon shrimp on Grace's plate, clearly wishing she could trade meals. But this was just the beginning of their new reality. From that day forward, I completely revolutionized my role in that household. I refused to take responsibility for anything related to Barbara or Jackson. I cooked only for Grace and myself, washed only our clothes, cleaned only the spaces we used, and left everything else to them. The house quickly descended into absolute chaos. Barbara, especially, bore the brunt of this new arrangement. There were days when she soiled herself and had no one to clean her up for hours. She would scream and cry, wailing that she might as well die rather than live in such conditions. The constant mess, the smell, and Barbara's non-stop complaints pushed Jackson to his breaking point faster than I'd ever imagined possible. His work performance suffered as he struggled to manage the household crises that seemed to multiply daily. Finally, after just 2 weeks of this new arrangement, Jackson completely broke down. He came to me one evening, his eyes red with exhaustion and desperation, his voice barely above a whisper. Madison, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, let's work this out. I can't do this anymore. The final straw had come that afternoon when Barbara had another major accident while Jackson was in the middle of an important video conference with his biggest clients. Despite his attempts to maintain his professional demeanor, Barbara's loud complaints and demands for immediate attention had completely disrupted the meeting. His boss had called him afterward to express serious concerns about his home situation, affecting his work performance. After ending that humiliating call, Jackson finally broke down completely. He came to me with tears streaming down his face, his voice pitiful and defeated. I'm sorry, Madison. I know I was wrong about everything. You've worked so incredibly hard to take care of this family, and I treated you terribly. Please forgive me just this once. From now on, I'll transfer your living expenses on time every single month without you having to ask. I'll even raise it to $4,000. No, $5,000. How does that sound? If this conversation had happened 2 weeks earlier, I might have been tempted to forgive him. But it was too late for that now. I didn't need Jackson anymore. The domestic staffing agency had already connected me with a perfect job opportunity. A wealthy family was looking for a live-in caregiver for their mother, who was a double amputee with a reputation for having a difficult personality. The position paid $7,000 a month, plus room and board. A difficult personality? After 7 years of dealing with Barbara, I could handle anyone. The family had been impressed by my extensive experience caring for a paralyzed family member and had hired me immediately. The job was set to start the following Monday. I looked at Jackson with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. $5,000. Who are you trying to fool, Jackson? That's too little. Too late. Jackson panicked, his voice becoming more desperate. Fine. I'll hand over my entire paycheck every month. We can go back to how things were in the beginning. Please. Madison? I shook my head firmly. No, Jackson. That ship has sailed. I raised my voice just enough to ensure Barbara could hear every word from the other room. I have a new job now, starting Monday. I'll be working as a live-in caregiver for a double amputee. They're paying me $7,000 a month, plus providing all my meals and housing. Jackson scoffed, his disbelief evident. $7,000 for maid work? You're being scammed, Madison. No one pays that much for domestic help. I smiled confidently. Oh, it's no scam. The pay is high because their mother has a terrible temper and has driven away every other caregiver they've tried to hire. But I'm not worried about that at all. My voice grew louder, ensuring Barbara heard every word. After all, no one's personality could possibly be worse than your mother's. 7 years of dealing with Barbara has prepared me for anything. From the other room, I heard Barbara gasp, audibly. She quickly wheeled herself into the living room, her face pale with panic. You're leaving to be someone else's servant? What about me? Who's going to take care of me? I looked her directly in the eyes, my voice dripping with sweet sarcasm. Well, Barbara, you could always ask your precious son to hire a professional caregiver for you. But caring for someone with your unique personality is going to cost at least $10,000 a month. Most agencies charge extra for clients who are verbally abusive to their staff. I glanced meaningfully at Jackson. But considering your son only makes $6,000 a month, hiring professional help would mean no money left over for anything else. I guess you'll be eating air for dinner from now on. Jackson's face turned crimson with a mixture of rage and panic. Fine. Madison, you want to play hardball? Then get out of my house right now. Either start paying rent like a tenant or pack your bags and leave. The audacity of this man continued to amaze me, still trying to bully and control me even after everything that had happened. Without flinching, I pulled out my phone and made a call right in front of both of them. Hi, Mrs. Reynolds. This is Madison. I've thought about your offer for live-in care, and I've decided I'm definitely interested in the 24/7 arrangement. I can move in starting tomorrow if that works for you. Mrs. Reynolds' voice was filled with gratitude and relief. Madison, you're absolutely a lifesaver. Finding someone willing to provide live-in care has been nearly impossible because most people prioritize their own family obligations. Since you're available for full-time residence, we'll add an extra $500 to your monthly salary as a bonus, I replied sweetly. Thank you so much, Mrs. Reynolds. I really appreciate your generosity. I'll see you tomorrow morning. After hanging up, I turned to Jackson and Barbara with a triumphant smile. See? Some people actually appreciate hard work and are willing to pay appropriately for quality care. Honestly, I should thank you both. If it weren't for 7 years of verbal abuse and constant criticism, I would never have developed the thick skin necessary to excel in this new position. Jackson and Barbara stood there in stunned silence, their faces displaying a mixture of shock, anger, and dawning realization that they had pushed me too far. Barbara, unwilling to admit defeat, snapped, desperately, Jackson, hire a maid for me immediately. I refuse to believe we can't find someone better than her. After everything fell apart, I packed my belongings, took Grace with me, and moved out of that house forever. Barbara initially tried to manipulate Jackson into using Grace as leverage to keep me tied to them, but after the police incident, Jackson had learned his lesson about child abandonment. He knew better than to use our daughter as a bargaining chip again. When I explained my situation to Mrs. Reynolds, including the fact that I needed to bring my daughter with me, She was incredibly understanding and accommodating. She agreed that I could bring Grace to live at their house as long as my daughter's presence didn't interfere with my caregiving responsibilities. To show my appreciation for this flexibility, I offered to accept the position without the additional $500 bonus she'd promised for live-in arrangements. Having a stable, safe place to live with Grace was worth more than the extra money. And so, Grace and I settled into our new life, a life of peace, respect, and financial independence. Meanwhile, back at Jackson's house, chaos reigned supreme. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who had become my unofficial source of information about the situation, regularly updated me with amusing reports of Jackson and Barbara's ongoing struggles. Jackson, desperate for help, had hired the cheapest domestic worker he could find to care for Barbara. At first, things seemed manageable, but anyone who knew Barbara could have predicted what would happen next. Within days, Barbara began her usual pattern of nitpicking, criticizing, and complaining about everything the new caregiver did. She found fault with the cooking, the cleaning, the way she was helped with personal care. Nothing was ever good enough for Barbara's impossible standards. The first caregiver lasted exactly 1 week before she'd had enough of Barbara's constant verbal abuse and quit without notice. Jackson was forced to hire a second caregiver, this time, someone more experienced and expensive. But as anyone in the caregiving profession knows, experienced workers have options. They don't need to tolerate abuse when they can easily find employment with respectful families. The second caregiver lasted 2 weeks before she also quit, citing Barbara's hostile work environment as the reason for her departure. Jackson, already overwhelmed by his demanding career during a critical growth phase in his company, couldn't handle the additional stress of constantly managing Barbara's care and complaints. His work performance continued to suffer as he spent his days dealing with caregiver turnover and his evenings listening to Barbara's litany of complaints about whoever was currently helping her. Eventually, Jackson reached his own breaking point. When the third caregiver quit, and Barbara launched into yet another tirade about how incompetent everyone was compared to me, Jackson finally snapped. For the first time in his life, he turned his anger directly toward his mother. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't treated Madison so horribly for all those years, she never would have left, and we wouldn't be in this nightmare situation." Hearing this secondhand from Mrs. Patterson made me shake my head in disbelief. Of course, Jackson would eventually blame everything on Barbara, conveniently forgetting his own role in driving me away. Yes, Barbara had been cruel and abusive, but Jackson's financial control and emotional manipulation had been equally damaging to our marriage. While I was enjoying the drama from a safe distance, I realized there was nothing quite like witnessing the aftermath in person. So at the end of the month, I decided to take a day off from work and pay them a little visit. Not to help, of course, but just to see how they were managing without me. I wanted to check on Barbara's living conditions, see what she was eating, observe whether she was sleeping well, and generally assess how she was coping without my care. After all, who better to evaluate the consequences of her past behavior than the person she'd spent 7 years mistreating? I put on a carefully chosen outfit, professional but not too formal, applied flawless makeup, and made my way back to what had once been my prison. When I walked through that front door, I found Barbara in the middle of yet another screaming match with her fourth hired caregiver. This one was a woman in her 50s, about Barbara's age, and she clearly had no patience for Barbara's entitled attitude. Barbara was pointing an accusatory finger at the woman, her voice shrill with indignation. "You lazy, worthless freeloader. I ask for a simple glass of water, and you take forever to bring it. What kind of caregiver are you? I should be paying you minimum wage, not professional rates." When Barbara noticed me standing in the doorway, her tone shifted dramatically. The same fake sweetness she'd used during her moments of desperation. "Oh, Madison, finally you're here. Look at this caregiver compared to you. You were absolutely perfect. You could anticipate my needs just by looking at me. If I so much as shifted in my chair, you knew exactly what I needed. And this woman, I can't even get basic service." But the caregiver had heard enough. Her face flushed with anger as she whirled around to face Barbara. "How dare you? Now you remember how good your daughter-in-law was? I've heard plenty about you from the neighbors, lady. They told me exactly how you treated her. Like absolute garbage. Even though she worked herself to the bone taking care of you for 7 years. The woman's voice rose with righteous fury. "You don't deserve quality help. You drove away the best caregiver you ever had, and now you're stuck with people like me who won't tolerate your abuse. And guess what? I'm quitting too." She tore off her apron and threw it directly at Barbara's face. "For $2,000 a month, you think I'm going to let you treat me like dirt? Keep dreaming, you miserable old woman." With that, the caregiver stormed out of the house, leaving Barbara sputtering with rage and humiliation. Suddenly alone with me, Barbara's demeanor shifted again. She turned on the waterworks, her voice taking on a pathetic, wheedling tone. "Madison, these past months without you have been absolute torture. These caregivers are so cruel and incompetent. They take my money but refuse to provide proper care. I've had time to think, and I realize now that you were the best daughter-in-law anyone could ask for." Crocodile tears rolled down her cheeks. "I know I made mistakes. I know I was sometimes too harsh with you. But please, I'm begging you to come back. I promise I'll treat you better. I'll be grateful and respectful. Please don't abandon me like this." Hearing these words, I felt a deep, aching pain in my chest, but not from pity or sympathy. The pain came from a devastating realization. How had I allowed myself to be reduced to this level for so many years? For 7 years, I had tolerated daily humiliation, insults, and degradation from a woman who couldn't even get to the bathroom without my assistance. If I had stood up for myself sooner, if I had demanded respect and fair treatment from the beginning, would Barbara or Jackson have dared to treat me so poorly? Of course not. I realize now that my own lack of self-respect and failure to establish boundaries had given these people permission to mistreat me. I had been complicit in my own abuse by accepting it for so long. Ignoring Barbara's desperate pleas, I walked directly to what had been my bedroom and began collecting the last few personal items that Grace and I had left behind. I was determined to remove every trace of our presence from this house. Once we were completely moved out, I planned to file for divorce and cut all ties with Jackson and Barbara forever. Barbara must have sensed the finality of my actions, because her panic reached new heights. "What are you doing? Where are you going? Are you really just going to abandon your husband and your family responsibilities?" I didn't respond. I simply continued packing, my silence more powerful than any words could have been. My lack of response drove Barbara into a frenzy of rage and desperation. "I knew it. You're just a selfish, heartless woman. You'd rather take care of complete strangers than your own family. You're nothing but a cold-hearted witch. I'll sue you for abandoning your family obligations." That was my breaking point. I couldn't hold back any longer. I turned to face her, my voice filled with 7 years of suppressed fury. "Sue me? Go ahead and try. Let's see what any court thinks when they hear the whole story. I spent 7 years slaving away in this house, taking care of you, only to be insulted, degraded, and treated like garbage every single day." My voice grew louder and more confident. "You think the legal system will side with you? An abusive, entitled, bitter old woman who drove away the best caregiver she ever had? You're delusional," Barbara stammered, her voice trembling with shock. You can't talk to me like that." I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If you ever insult me again, I swear I'll slap you so hard you'll think twice before opening that vicious mouth of yours. I put up with your abuse for 7 years, but those days are over forever. You think I'm an easy target? Think again." For the first time in 7 years, my words left Barbara completely speechless. I was nearly finished packing when I noticed 2 of Grace's favorite dolls on the balcony outside our old bedroom. I walked over to retrieve them, planning to surprise Grace with these forgotten treasures. Without warning, Barbara let out an ear-splitting scream and hurled a heavy ceramic coffee mug directly at my head. "You backstabbing witch! I'll kill you myself." Instinctively, I ducked just in time. The heavy mug missed me by inches, flew through the open balcony door, and tumbled straight down 10 stories to the street below. My heart stopped. We were on the 10th floor of the building. If that mug hit someone, the consequences could be catastrophic, potentially fatal. I rushed to the balcony railing and looked down, praying I wouldn't see what I feared most. But my worst nightmare had come true. The mug had struck someone directly on the head. The figure staggered for a moment before collapsing onto the pavement, a pool of blood rapidly forming around them. I whipped around to face Barbara, my voice shaking with horror and rage. "Barbara, do you have any idea what you've just done? That mug could have killed someone. Do you think Jackson has enough money to pay for attempted murder charges?" Barbara's face had gone pale, but she immediately went on the defensive, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "This is your fault. If you hadn't moved out of the way, I wouldn't have missed. If anyone has to pay consequences, it should be you, not me." I laughed bitterly, my voice dripping with disgust. "Oh, absolutely. Tell that to the police when they get here. They'll love hearing how your fingerprints are all over that murder weapon. You're going to pay for this, Barbara. In more ways than you can imagine." I rushed downstairs to check on the victim and call for emergency help, but when I got closer to the scene, my heart sank into my stomach. The person lying in a pool of blood on the pavement was Jackson. By the time the paramedics reached the hospital, Jackson was already gone. The ceramic mug, thrown from 10 stories up, had struck him directly in the head, killing him almost instantly. When the devastating news reached Barbara, she broke down into complete hysterics. Her wails echoed through the hospital corridors. "My son, my poor, precious boy, how could this happen to you? What am I going to do without you? You were everything to me." But as her grief transformed into rage, her tear-streaked face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at me. "This is all your fault, you evil witch. You cursed my son. You brought death into our family. Why couldn't you be the one to die instead? Give me back my son, you heartless monster." Some people are truly incapable of taking responsibility for their actions. No matter what terrible things happen as a result of their choices, they'll always find someone else to blame, as if shifting responsibility can somehow absolve them of their sins and erase the consequences of their behavior. But I wasn't going to tolerate Barbara's accusations for even one more second. I met her venomous hatred with equal fire. "Your son is dead because of you, Barbara. You are the murderer here. You threw that mug in a fit of rage. If anyone deserved to die today, it was you, not Jackson." For a brief, terrible moment, I understood exactly why Barbara had always used such cruel, cutting language. There was a dark satisfaction in lashing back at someone who had made your life miserable, in finally giving them a taste of their own medicine. But I also knew that dwelling in hatred and bitterness would only poison my own life. Some battles aren't worth fighting, and some people aren't worth the energy it takes to hate them. After making my point crystal clear, I didn't give Barbara another second of my time or attention. I turned and walked away from her forever. After all, I had much more important things to focus on, like preparing to claim my rightful inheritance from Jackson's estate. After Barbara accidentally killed Jackson, I reported the incident to the police as required by law. However, given Barbara's physical condition, paralyzed from the waist down and completely dependent on others for basic care, even if she were convicted of manslaughter, she would likely serve any sentence under house arrest rather than in prison. Pursuing criminal charges felt meaningless and expensive, so I decided to let the legal system handle the situation without my active involvement. Jackson was gone, and I had no intention of wasting any more of my life dealing with Barbara's drama. The inheritance process was surprisingly straightforward. As Jackson's legal beneficiaries, the estate was divided among Grace, Barbara, and me according to standard inheritance laws. To avoid any potential disputes or legal complications, we split everything according to the exact percentages mandated by state law. In a final gesture of generosity, and to definitively close this chapter of my life, I left the house entirely to Barbara. This fulfilled my legal obligations as Jackson's widow and demonstrated that I was taking the high road, despite everything she'd put me through. But knowing Barbara's personality as well as I did, I was absolutely certain that being a paralyzed woman with visible wealth would make her an irresistible target for opportunistic relatives and con artists. Vulnerable elderly people with money are magnets for people with bad intentions. Sure enough, within weeks of Jackson's death, Barbara began attracting attention from family members on her maternal side who had never shown any interest in her well-being before. Suddenly, distant cousins and nephews were calling regularly, offering to help with her care and financial management. That wasn't my problem anymore. My only focus was on raising Grace in a stable, loving environment and building a secure future for both of us. Several years passed peacefully. Grace thrived in school, I excelled in my caregiving career, and we built a beautiful life together, filled with mutual respect and genuine happiness. Then, one day, I received unexpected news. Barbara had passed away. Initially, I had no intention of involving myself in her funeral arrangements or estate matters. But then I learned that Barbara had left a portion of her inheritance specifically to Grace. As Grace's mother and legal guardian, I felt obligated to return and handle the necessary paperwork. That's when I discovered what Barbara's life had been like during her final years, and it was both tragic and entirely predictable. After I left, Barbara had struggled desperately to find reliable care. Distrustful of professional agencies and paranoid about protecting her wealth from strangers, she eventually turned to a nephew from her maternal family, a man named Robert who had barely spoken to her in decades. Barbara offered Robert a deal that seemed mutually beneficial. If he moved in and provided full-time care until her death, she would leave him the house in her will. Robert agreed to the arrangement and moved in with his wife and 3 children. They even hired a lawyer to formalize the agreement with proper legal documentation. At first, the arrangement worked reasonably well. Robert genuinely cared for Barbara and fulfilled his caregiving responsibilities conscientiously. But Barbara's abrasive, critical personality was something she could never change or control. It didn't take long for conflicts to arise between Barbara and Robert's wife, Linda. Barbara, true to form, began criticizing Linda's cooking, her housekeeping, her parenting style, and virtually everything else about her presence in Barbara's house. Unlike Jackson, Robert wasn't the type of man to tolerate anyone disrespecting his wife. He took Linda's side in every conflict. And gradually, the family's attitude toward Barbara began to shift, from caring to resentful. As Barbara's health declined and her care needs increased, Robert and Linda began to see her as a burden they had to endure rather than a family member they wanted to help. They provided the minimum level of care required to avoid legal liability, but their hearts were no longer in it. What they didn't know was that Barbara, despite her deteriorating health, was still sharp enough to recognize their changed attitude. She also noticed them making plans for their house, discussing renovations they wanted to make, and furniture they planned to buy, once Barbara was no longer a factor. Barbara might have been many terrible things, but she wasn't stupid. Behind Robert's back, she contacted her lawyer and made a crucial change to her will. Instead of leaving the house to Robert as originally promised, she left it to Grace. When Barbara finally passed away, Robert was absolutely furious. He felt betrayed and cheated out of what he believed was rightfully his after years of caregiving. He immediately attempted to contest the will, claiming that Barbara had been mentally incompetent or unduly influenced when she made the change. But I was prepared for this possibility. I involved the police to ensure that the law was properly upheld and hired an attorney to protect Grace's interests. With a valid, legally executed will in place and no evidence of mental incompetence, Robert's challenge had no legal merit. The courts upheld Barbara's final will, and Robert had no choice but to accept the outcome. I quickly arranged Barbara's funeral, a simple, dignified service, and immediately put the house on the market. The sale proceeds provided a substantial nest egg for Grace's future education and our continued financial security. Robert and his family could be as angry as they wanted, but there was absolutely nothing they could do to change the legal reality. Some people suggested that Barbara must have developed a conscience in her final years, finally recognizing Grace as her granddaughter and wanting to provide for her future. But I knew Barbara better than that. Barbara had never cared about Grace or me. She had looked down on us, insulted us, and treated us as inferior throughout our entire relationship. Her decision to leave the house to Grace wasn't motivated by love or guilt, or any desire to make amends. It was pure spite. Barbara would rather see the house go to Grace, a granddaughter she'd barely acknowledged, than let Robert and his family benefit from her death after they'd mistreated her in her final years. If Barbara had truly cared about Grace's well-being, she would have used the house as leverage to force me to return and care for her until the end. Instead, her final act was one last gesture of petty revenge against people who had disappointed her expectations. Robert's family had turned against each other, fighting over money and property, but ultimately the house came full circle back to Grace. It's funny how life works sometimes. The universe has a strange sense of justice. Sometimes the people, who try to do the right thing, even imperfectly, end up being rewarded in unexpected ways. As for me, I never looked back. I built a successful career, raised a wonderful daughter, and learned the most important lesson of my life. Your value as a person isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you choose to treat yourself. I chose freedom. I chose self-respect, and I chose happiness, and that made all the difference.